Well, let's try this then. So basically, you'll recall, I think the last time I had talked about some of the broader perspectives and trying to figure out, what is this all about? And we talked about the two different varieties of America. And so one of them essentially being the 1619 Project, which postulates that the country was formed in 1619 with the arrival of the first African slaves in Virginia, and essentially everything that has occurred historically since then has been affected, impacted, tainted, made bad by racism. And basically the remedy that comes out of it is that anyone whose identity today can be connected in some way to these people from the past is either entitled to something, to some compensation for that, or owes a debt that can never be paid. And so you can see that that's not going to be something that I think people are going to be happy living with. That is the radical version, if you will. And the other side seems to be the continuance of what is ordinary or what is normal, founding in 1776, constitutional republic, Betsy Ross, George Washington, apple pie, the whole 9 yards.
So like classicalism almost?
Yeah, traditional, maybe. Maybe you could call it like accuratism. I don't know. These are things that actually happen, and we have good evidence to support, and we have not just multiple accounts historically, but in some cases, mass accounts of things in multiple areas, and oftentimes from the perspective of different countries who are looking on while all this occurred too. So it's very easy to dismiss, but it's kind of turning into one of those myths, and we talked about the 79 cents on the dollar myth. So and I hesitate to call that a myth. It's technically true. It is true that the average working wage of all women in the United States who work compared to the average working wage of all men in the United States who work, when you compare those, you will end up with a ratio of 79 cents to $1. The problem is that no one stops there, because that much is true. The problem is it doesn't tell us anything. There's not a single variable in there. It doesn't tell you how many men versus how many women were evaluated, what were their ages, how long did they work in the industry, what type of jobs did they do, did they enter the workforce late, did they have kids, what are their obligations. I mean, there are just a million variables that we could add to that data in order to extract something meaningful. But if we just slap down two numbers and we go, hey, look, here's the average versus the average wage, it literally tells us nothing. It isn't capable of telling us anything. It's really not even a statistic. It's just a comparison of two figures. And yet, in universities around the country, this will be preached as though it's completely true. There's no other dimension to consider or to think about, and it's the law of the land. And you have to wonder when something is so odd. And by the way, it's not anti-women to point this out either. I actually think that it's pro-women's rights, because if women want to advance rights or whatever it is they want to do, would you not prefer to have a legitimate basis for doing that? And nothing drives me crazier than seeing groups of women who may have an issue. And I may look at that and think, I could support that. Like, I actually agree with them on this one. But because they're basing it off some insane belief, like extrapolating from the 79 cents on the dollar figure, it's impossible. Like, they're right, but for the wrong reason. And that has to be fixed, So I would much rather see women who say, well, no, look, I don't need to rely on that as like the only argument, like, oh God, if we lose that, we'd lose the war against men or something. There are plenty of rational, logical arguments to support your case. You don't need to rely on something that is garbage like that. Please just know that. So basically, I think that we ended up here at the end of the semester on purpose. I wanted to, in theater, they talk about the fourth wall. And the fourth wall is, if you don't know this, it's basically the invisible wall between the actors and the audience. And so sometimes you'll hear the expression breaking down the fourth wall. And when you break down the fourth wall, what you're essentially doing is you're acknowledging that the audience exists. So you may see actors in a play sometimes, and some quirky thing may happen, and they may look at the audience and go, and don't forget that. Like they broke that fourth wall for a moment, and then they went back to pretending the audience wasn't there. That's what that is. And so today, being the last day, I always tear down the fourth wall. And if you'll recall from the beginning of the semester, I told you that I would do my level best to be neutral and to not be politically biased and to not try to spoon feed anyone an ideology in here. And I can tell you sincerely, I've done my level best to maintain that. I think that if there were times when we were more critical on one side than the other, or one issue more so than the other, then I felt like I did a fairly good job of pointing out that it's because this is the group in power. We don't even have a balance of power now. You don't have, for example, Republican control the Senate and Democratic control the House, where there'd be a lot of tension, and you would expect more equal criticism toward both parties and both people. But when one of the downsides of being the party in control is that you're also the only one in the spotlight in those moments. And so while there are plenty of other people to criticize, for us in a journalism class, we're going to default on who's in power, because that's what this is all about. And so had it been reversed, if it were 2018 and we were in here, I think this course would have a markedly different flavor. So please understand, if you felt like it was too critical of people on the left, it's because we're a journalism class and we're about taking questions to power, and that just happens to be who's in power now. I wanted to solicit your opinions and see what you thought. It's valuable to me to know if you think that I did a decent job, or if you think I didn't, or if you have any questions. I did my best to keep all of my ideological positions, political, religious, and social, hidden from you. And I'm willing to entertain your best guesses if you think you have me figured out. Or if you just wonder how I feel about a certain issue, I'm happy to answer that too. Have you all just figured me out? Is that what it is?
I think it's more too afraid to try and pin you down.
Too afraid to try? Why? You might be wrong.
Yeah.
Does everyone agree with that? Do you think I would be hard to figure out where I stand on things?
Well,
I think you'd be surprised. Some of you who feel confident that you maybe know, I think you'd be surprised.
I feel like you more have a roller coaster of opinions on things rather than. Because here's the thing, we've talked about it in here, especially with technology making it so that you have the false dilemma of only being able to go on one side or the other. That's how it feels now.
Sure.
Like you can only, like I was watching PBS NewsHour, and I forgot to bring this up last time, but on 428, they had a full segment from their White House correspondent about how you can only be, not that. It was how the Congress is divided, and because of that, it's making it impossible to get anything through. And the thing is, they were talking about, she made a graph of the issues that were more than likely to get passed versus the issues that wouldn't get passed. And like on the far left, it was the Ukraine spending bill, and on the far right of not being, more than likely not getting passed, it was the, I think, Manchin's deficit bill. And I thought, and it's just, there's an obvious disconnect there, because you can only go on one side or the other, and because of that, no one wants to actually come together and work, because it would be seen as like, what's that word? Betraying, sort of. And you saw that with the Senate hearings as well. Anyway, so it's more like, I'm not afraid or anything like that. It's more like my brain is defaulting to the whole technology 2D personality of you can only go one side or the other, and that's not true. And so it's like, I feel like you have more of a 3D kind of opinion on a lot of things.
Oh, thank you. Well, I take that as a compliment, and I think, well, I hope that's true. I try to.
Right.
I'm not sure. There are some issues specifically, especially some of the bigger ones. I mean, abortion is front and center now because of what occurred. But there's just some issues that I haven't really considered that much. Others I've considered a lot. I can tell you this much, many issues that are in the public sphere in our purview all the time, there are issues that I've been on both sides of, sometimes multiple times. Like I started out here, and then I moved over here, and then I went back to it, and always be willing to allow yourself to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. Right? You should celebrate. When you figure out that you're wrong about something, you have two things to celebrate. Number one, that you were able to correct it, and number two, that you were able to acknowledge it. Because most people aren't able to do that. Pride gets in the way. It's hard. It's hard for me when I'm wrong. It's hard for me to come back and go, all right, well, especially to myself when no one's looking. So if I've formed some political perspective, let's say, and then I realize down the road that that's inaccurate, inadequate, outright wrong, whatever it is, I still struggle with that. I still struggle to go back, and it's like, well, I had sort of come to really believe and embody that, and also I came to see the people on the other side of that issue as morons. So there are a number of obstacles to just sort of accept this new idea now, and those are the things that make it difficult, but challenge yourself to do that.
Now, here's the thing. Whenever you go through that, is it more, would you call those, it'd be like mini liminal spaces, wouldn't it? Like having to, but if you have it for so many, it feels like I'm constantly in some form of liminal space now because of where we are in the world.
Like as a country, in this moment?
Not only a country, but in the world in general. Like in 2016, I was worrying about Cold Wars and things, and now I'm worrying about actual wars, and also a Cold War, and also et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just, I think that's another thing with how making any kind of decision and trying to figure out other people's decisions, because you don't know what liminal spaces they're going through. Because I think just meeting somebody, they're going to be in at least one or two just from looking at the news for a little bit too long, or even looking at their phone for a little too long.
Does everyone recall, it was just before the first exam, and we took a vote to see how many people believed the results as
election, yeah.
broadcast election. And 14 of 16 people did not raise their hand. They did not agree with what the stated results were. And I thought that was peculiar. That it really shocked me that the whole class, because, I mean, look, I don't know where anybody stands on issues, and I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But I would have just assumed that being in college and you all being on the younger side, in many cases 5 to 6 years younger than I am, that you would be more to the left on issues, and so that by default you would just naturally, why would you question that? I assume you wouldn't care about politics that much to begin with, and that you would just kind of be on that side. And so it was shocking to me that many of you doubted the announced results.
I will say, though, at that point, that was in like the 4th week, I think, it was a lot more, well, I kept talking, but it was a lot more of a subdued classroom, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also that fear of being wrong. Like, whenever I did it, I just watched like John Oliver the night before, and it was actually the one about, I rewatched John Oliver bits a lot just because I like watching them.
Oh, dear God. Gotta get out.
Oh, stop. But we had watched one about the election, and I was looking into it, and so genuinely, for timing-wise, that kind of solidified my thing. So I think it's, again, that whole thing of being wrong, because whenever you asked that question, we didn't know whether you would go into it and try and break. A lot of people don't want to be the one to actually step up, you know what I mean, and don't want to be the ones to put themselves on the chopping block potentially.
Yeah, I think that's true. I see that a lot. I have classes that are full of really bright people now, and it's hard to get a response. And when you actually drag it out of people, it's shocking that they have really thoughtful and well-articulated responses, and it's like, well, will you please say that in class so that we can frame a discussion around it, because that is incredibly valuable. And I've noticed in the post-COVID world, it's been difficult. I think I mentioned to all of you, the high schools are the worst, where I see them, imagine around 10th grade, every semester I'll have 1 or 2 dual credit classes. And since we returned from COVID, and by the way, there are sections of them that are still out on remote delivery.
Yeah.
And it's definitely affected them. The thing that I notice now is, instead of a room like this where it's a group that coalesces more or less, in the high schools there will be groups of like 3 people here, 2 in the back, 4 over here, 3 here, and they're just completely siloed off into their groups. And like every group has its own weird dynamic. Like some of them clearly don't like me. Some of them love me. Some of them are interested like periodically, it depends on the topic. And then some of them are like, they're real intelligent people. Then there are groups where they're just slackers and they don't care. And to try and break all those things down and get them to function as a group has been next to impossible. And I can confirm for you that the high schools are also falling on their faces, because a lot of the kids that I see face to face now, they have just about a full year under their belt having returned. And it's very evident the difference between these new groups and the ones that I had in the past that weren't stuck under remote delivery for 2 years. They're not socialized correctly. They're very nervous about answering questions or chiming in on stuff, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to address it, but I'm telling you, it's a problem for sure.
I will say, I think that was a problem beforehand. COVID definitely exacerbated it, genuinely.
Yeah.
But I think, because that's a degree of that was how my high school was going as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I always fall back. It could be because of technology. It could just be because of like differences in how we're being raised and such like that. I don't know, just by things. But I think it started before the pandemic, but then was basically just really hammered home during the pandemic, and now trying to get out of it and trying to fight with the notion of getting back to a normal. Their normal was already on the downhill, so it's like they're fighting upwards to a downhill center anyway.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Who in here thinks that we ought to abortion? It's a good idea. Let's just dial it up. It's the last day. Who's on board with that? If you think that the Supreme Court, they're moving the right way there. No, everybody's afraid to say? Yeah. Why not, I don't know, how long has it been? 1973, and so, let's see, what would that, how many years would that be? It's impossible for me to compute.
Right here, 27, it would be
50. 48 years.
50.
Yeah, how did I know that so quickly? So, the problem is, we really don't have anything to compare to in this situation. We've done it about 50 years. One way. So, I don't know, let's turn it upside down and do it the other way for 50 years and see how that goes. Try it the other way for a while. We have a pretty clear idea of the pros and cons, I think, after 50 years of it this way. What do you think? Yeah? No? Some yeses, some nos? I'm going to just divulge to you because we have no fourth wall today.
Yeah.
I actually would support doing that. To flip it over. Yeah, and not for the reasons that you might think. It's a little complicated, but I'm more concerned with what society is evolving into, how it takes care of itself, what is it, how is it defined. And so with the issue aside of, the rights of women to choose that, first thing I would say is, in the case of incest or rape, assault, or a threat to the life of the mother, those should be enshrined. I know that there are ethical questions there, and it would be very hard to justify aborting an innocent fetus who's no less innocent, even in the case of rape. But that is a deep philosophical question that we're not going to entertain, and I'm okay with defaulting on the side of the woman for the decision in that case. I would never get in the way and say, well, gee, you know, I know you were assaulted and beat up and raped, but you ought to consider, it's just not appropriate. So I would acknowledge that there's a philosophical dilemma in that, but I also don't care, because I just think it's such a heinous thing that women own that decision, and that part should be enshrined. That part should never, anyone who questions that, other than for the purpose of having a philosophical discussion, I think is incredibly misguided to want to take that in those instances away. But my issue with it is not the life of the fetus or religion or we can't figure this out. My issue is very simple, and it is this. If you maintain a society wherein you are unintentionally, through social policy, sending a message that you don't have to take responsibility for your behavior, there's a trap door, and you could get a procedure and we could just nullify that. So therefore, feel free and totally uninhibited to have as much sex as you want with whomever, and we've really gone to great lengths in the country to shore up the notion that if there were consequences as a result of that, we have apparatus in place to remove those consequences. And so regardless of the specifics of the law and all of the different dimensions that it touches on and the people it affects, I think for me it is simply that easy, where it really doesn't even have anything to do with women getting abortions. It has more to do with the implicit message that's in it. So you have people raised in a society where it's like, oh, okay, so this is kind of a disposable feature, and they just don't end up valuing it in the way that they should.
But here's the thing.
And so I'd like to try it the other way.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You're talking about taking responsibility, but if in the case of whoever's looking to get an abortion, they can't support the child or anything like that, and they can't.
Well, you're already after the fact, though, because now she's pregnant.
Well, yeah, but then if she can't keep herself healthy and she can't keep the
But you're assuming,
environment around her healthy,
do
then
women just become pregnant magically?
How would she be? Okay, you're getting into dangerous territory there.
Why is that?
But how could she be responsible if she doesn't have the tools available to her? And because of that, wouldn't she be taking responsibility by ending it there?
It's all of that is after the fact, is after the question, though. Like, I wouldn't even disagree with a lot of it.
Yeah.
The problem is it's not helpful, because, only for this reason, because we're talking about the act of becoming pregnant, or that's what I'm backing up to. Is it's like, well, if your society doesn't have abortion services, then it's going to force women and men to think a lot more clearly and carefully before they have relations. And I think the notion that, well, we have all these unintended pregnancies, and so we simply have to have this service there in order to remedy it, really absolves people of any responsibility. Like, you couldn't figure out in life how to not end up pregnant. And believe me, I understand it's unintentional all the time. People have taken precautions, and that's the result. I get it, that happens. But I just think if we, and again, it really doesn't have so much to do with abortion, but I honestly believe if we had laws or rules, let's say, of that nature, that I just don't like the idea that it instills, hey, don't worry about being responsible, just do whatever you want, and the consequences can be taken care of. Just that message, I think, has so many consequences when you follow it to all of its far-reaching dimensions in society. When you start with that mindset, I mean, think about how far that can go. Now, maybe there's a way that we could restrict abortion or strip out some part of it so that we could find a compromise. But when you look at the egregious actions of New York, for example, who, under no pressure and no demands from any women's groups at all, just out of nowhere announced that they were going to allow full-term abortions all the way up to the moment of labor. It's just like it's kind of some sort of macabre, disgusting overstatement of principle. And then they lit up the Empire State Building pink to celebrate the victory for women. Does anyone, am I the only one that thought that was insane? Like, no women were clamoring for that. If there were mobs of women around the governor's mansion, like, hey, goddamn it, we demand that we have abortions all the way up to the moment of labor, at least there's a crowd. You may not agree with them, but at least there is a movement. There are people there who genuinely want this, genuinely want this. But when you have government just take it automatic action out of nowhere, hey, look what we did, poof, celebrate for women. It's like, well, now hold on a second. Government is supposed to be what responds to the will of the people. It's not supposed to determine what the will of the people is or divine it and then create laws to go along with it. That's completely back-asswards, as they say.
Can I ask, do you think, though, that there is some issue with the fact that 50, 60, 70-year-old men are the ones that are controlling this instead of females?
No, why would they? Would you ask me if I had an issue if they were all black women in their 50s?
No, what I mean by that is, do you think that
Well, then why would it matter?
men should control men's bodies and women should control...
I thought you meant in general, like, as
No,
the Senate is
I read
clearly.
that wrong, but
Oh, I
I think
understand
that's
now.
like reasonably, I think that's a major issue, a major problem, that if you ever see like a panel on abortion, it's usually some Mitt Romney-looking people instead of like...
Well, your ability to become pregnant or your ability to identify with the argument because you happen to be of the gender or you happen to be in whatever situation, in whatever argument, has nothing to do with the argument. It doesn't illuminate it in any way. It doesn't add any weight to your case. It doesn't help your side of it to point out. It's simply a cudgel. So for me, for example, if I were to say, like, let's say I were in trouble in some debate, and I said, well, listen, as a white male, speaking as a white male who's gone through this, that's a way to tell the other side, hey, shut up. You're not allowed to speak to this. I've just defined the problem as only being able to be understood by a white male. My subjective perspective, postmodern view, right?
Well, I think there's a difference
Deconstructive.
between like, there's a huge difference between race and gender, because
Well, I agree.
like race laws versus gender laws now are night and day, apples to oranges.
Well, they should be. They're two totally different categories.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Theft and rape are not treated the same.
Oh, right. So like,
Well.
like a white man and a black woman should be able to, make laws about race, but I don't think like, Tucker Carlson should have any input or be able to say anything about, abortion. At the pace of a snail.
I think all those guys should, even the Sean Hannitys, which I'm in no way a fan, or you go to the left and who would, I guess like a Joy Reid would be kind of the firebrand equivalent.
Anderson Cooper too,
Yeah. A little bit less so. He's a little more tame, but I think all of them should have the platform. I have no problem at all. No problem. Does that mean I agree with it and I enjoy it and I tune in and I listen and I cheer for it? Hell no. But you know what? When they're allowed to do that, I can know exactly what's going on in Joy Reid's mind. I can know exactly what's going on in Sean Hannity's mind. Because
Sure.
they are allowed to express themselves and to say, in whatever shitty, horrible way, exactly what they think.
What's your take on Marjorie Taylor Greene?
She strikes me as, it's hard for me to see her outside of the role of like PTA parent or soccer mom.
Reminds me of
She
like
just
a
strikes me as
far-right
like-
Leslie Knope, if you've ever watched that Parks and Rec.
Oh.
I don't know her well enough to speak to her politics, so I can't say
No, there
that.
is no politics. She is Sarah Palin with a slight meth addiction and like some Leslie Knope. From
I don't think she has a meth addiction, does she?
There's something. There's that woman is
Yeah.
taking some stuff.
She's
I
falling
get
apart.
the humor, but yeah, she just strikes me as an angry mom who is kind of I don't know. When I look at her, I don't get that same buffoonish sense that I got from Sarah Palin of just being a complete know-nothing.
Yeah, there's
Because it was
another girl,
obvious.
I don't know what her name is. There's another one that her I think her boyfriend or her husband is like it's on the sex offender list, sexual registry list. I don't know what her name is, but she's Bower or something like that. Laura Bower. I don't know.
That sounds
She's the
really
same kind of
familiar.
person.
Yeah, so like I said, I can't speak to the politics of it, but the difference, I would say this, with the Sarah Palin, from my perspective, it was pretty clear that she was just not, she just didn't have the equipment to process and spit out good answers and knowledgeable things. We'll just leave it there. And that's my opinion. But in the case of Marjorie Taylor Greene, my impression of her is not that she is stupid in that way. It's that she's completely inexperienced. Like, imagine if your mom or your dad were elected as a senator and had to go in there and just like go figure it out. Like, they would look a lot like her, and it would probably be really easy for the news media to be like, hey, look at this guy, you know, what a joke. What a crazy nut, you know, he's talking about. And it would be easy to make that person look buffoonish because they have no experience in Washington. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, can you imagine, like, you go from taking your kids to the soccer games and stuff and whatever else you do to like now you're a representative in Congress. And so most of the people that are there have decades of experience, or before they arrived there, they worked their way up through the lower ranks of being elected as mayor or governor, et cetera. And I think she's one of the handful, and I'm not trying to defend her. As I said, I don't know her politics other than she's on the right. But I do think someone like that strikes me as more inexperienced than incapable. And that's about all I can say about her.
Who's your favorite talk show news host, and who's your least favorite talk show news host? Because I was
I have to say, you just want my opinion on this one?
Just straight up.
Yeah, I think Tucker Carlson is doing a great job. He's the #1 cable news show far and away, and I think that...
In terms of viewership, definitely.
Yeah, I think that that's accurate. I think that his having the majority share is accurate because I think he doesn't necessarily come down on the correct side of issues or the ones that I would always agree with. But what I see from him is that he's always on the correct issue. So like I can still watch him and be like, okay, I can strip out what his opinion is. Like he's clearly going this direction, or this is his attitude. It's easy. He's not hiding it. It's a cable news show, so he can be right out open with that. That's why I love the free speech component. But I am able to strip out, I feel like, if it's his opinion and I don't like it, and I can still look at it and go, hey, you know what? He's talking about the Ukraine war, and he's doing it from the perspective that no one else is. He's talking about the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Now, some of that is going to be by default because it's a conservative show. He's going to be on those issues.
Yeah.
And so he can't really get credit for all of that. But I think generally speaking, the programming on that show seems to be fairly well aligned with the issues that are relevant in society, more so than any of the other cable news talk shows.
What about your least favorite?
Joy Reid.
That's fair.
Yeah. She is just an absolute vile human being. And the fact that, I think the fact that she has everyone cowering and like too afraid to point directly in her face and say, you are a filthy, disgusting racist of the highest order and the worst kind. And the fact that you have a platform in our society is, it is a terrible thing against our own society that we don't have the ability or we don't have the gumption to make the decision to get this vile person. Somehow like we have to tolerate it because it's self-flagellation for like being white or because history, because somehow we have to reward group A and punish group B because of what group C did to group D. I mean, that is the central thesis in every case, and it just doesn't pan out. So
she's also, when she interviews someone, is so obnoxious she cannot stop interrupting.
yeah.
Unbearable.
And I would even look in her probably more so than the others. I would defend her free speech more vehemently than I would any of the others, I think, because I want her to have free speech. I don't want her to feel like, ooh, I should hold back. I shouldn't say my real. No, please, by all means, Joy, by all means, lay it right out there. Let us see it in all of its filthy, detailed ugliness. That's why I support free speech, because I want everyone to be able to see that. I wouldn't want people to be like, well, you know, she kind of goes off the deep end now and again, but who doesn't? She's generally, you know, fair-minded. And no. I want people to be able to see and make their own conclusions, because I trust that they'll come to the correct conclusions in that case, I think. If I had a dislike on I'm trying to think to balance it out, if there was one that I disliked on the right, it'd probably be Sean Hannity. And it's not for the same reason. Like, Joy Reid is an open racist, and she celebrates it. That's crystal clear. I wouldn't say that about Sean Hannity, or that he's like a prejudice or bias, or it's not about that. Maybe he is, I don't know, but I just don't like his personality. He just rubs me the wrong way. I don't know why. He's just one of those people that if I had to go to some business meeting and they were like, oh, here's the group that you're going to be working with, just on site, I would be like, I don't like that guy. And I don't know why. You meet people like that, you know what I'm talking about sometimes, and it's like just the sight of them, you're like, I don't like you. And I have no idea why. That's Sean Hannity. So I'm sorry that I can't articulate it any better than that, but every time, because I have friends that send me stuff, every time I see it's him, I'm like, yeah, I'll just not watch that. And the same thing with Joy Reid, in fairness. I can't even stand to watch it because it doesn't, I'm no longer upset with her. It makes me angry that there's a station who thinks like, hey, let's just keep pumping this out there. Like, why would you? What value could you possibly? I just don't know. So,
How likely is it that we're gonna see aliens in the next 2 years?
oh, I think not likely at all.
Damn it.
Yeah, I think it's not just a U.S. government conspiracy like people have
I feel
felt.
like a world
Yeah,
conspiracy at this point.
well, I mean, every country is trying to keep it a secret because they're worried that if they reveal the existence of aliens, that it will destroy the ideological norms, the religious ties, and yeah, I didn't think so much
I'm
now.
already in a liminal space. Let's go even deeper. Come on.
I think it's pretty clear that that's what's going on. That there are still parts of it that bother me, that there's still inconsistencies. Like when you look at the supposed UFO crashes that occurred around the 1940s and 50s,
Yeah.
I mean, there was one in Russia, you have the Roswell, there were actually several in New Mexico.
Yeah.
In fact, even Roswell, there are 2 crash sites. They think that there were 2 different ones on that day. And it's like, somehow they can all get across the galaxy, no problem, dodging planets and black holes and navigating their way here. We can't even imagine how to do it. But then when they get here, somehow they can't fly worth a shit. They're crashing and like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Are
Like
you under the notion that it's just military stuff?
I mean, I think that they conveniently use that for a long time. It's like, let's pump up the alien UFO story, and that way nobody's talking about the secret stuff we're doing at Area 51.
That's what I was figuring.
Smart.
It was just something going on. I mean, it's like, I don't remember when they were doing like the atom bombs and all that. I think it was somewhere in Nevada, or Nevada, where
Yeah, it was.
they just lost one. And it went down there and just it staggered.
Yeah, I think that the most compelling evidence right now is with the National Institute of Discovery Science and Robert Bigelow and his time at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Well, whatever they're doing there now with the reality TV show and the silliness, I have no doubt that craziness is still occurring there to some degree. But when you look at the Pentagon and the DoD studies, and when you read, there's a book called Skinwalkers in the Pentagon.
Nice.
And it's about the people who were that top secret classification, and they were sent out to Skinwalker Ranch with Bob Bigelow to study this phenomena.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they canceled the whole thing was because the government researchers were coming home with what they call hitchhikers,
Oh, that's fun.
so that they would see these apparitions and this stuff going on at Skinwalker Ranch. And by the way, it's not one phenomenon. There's like Bigfoot thing, creatures
yeah.
that appear, there are UFOs there. It's like a Disneyland of paranormal. Everything is there in this
Please
one
let me
weird
go.
spot. And the fact that the people who worked for the Department of Defense were taking these things home, and some of the stories they won't even talk about, but there are several where it's like the guy got home, and then the next day his wife was having coffee and looked out the window, and there was a wolf that was standing on 2 legs, leaning up against a tree with its paws like this, staring at her. And when she ran over to the door, it took off and ran down the street, like this enormous, bigger than any actual wolf would be.
Yeah.
And it kicked leaves up, and so, it's like, well, it wasn't me just seeing things. The leaves got kicked up and there's marks, so like something was real there. But it clearly was this thing that had been seen in Utah. Now they're in Virginia somewhere, and so the things follow them, usually permanently.
How quickly can I get a Greyhound bus ticket to the Skinwalker Ranch?
Believe it or not, only 15 miles away from Skinwalker Ranch, there was about 100 acres of property that you wouldn't ever dream of doing anything with. It's just useless. It's beautiful, but it's rocky, and then it's hilly, and there's water, and you could never build. It's just useless. And it was like $60,000, and I was so tempted because I'm in
You
a
should be.
weird spot. I just thought, just buy that. But what am I gonna do? Go out and like put a tent out there in the middle of the night and like just wait for stuff to?
Yes.
I can't see that, you know.
Make a YouTube series. You could go viral.
But I do think that's the most compelling evidence out
Yeah.
there, would be the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, because you also have UFOs there. So it makes you think that that may be a source of some kind.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, everything has to be hidden and concealed by our government for reasons unknown.
Hate it.
But they're leaking it out slowly but surely.
Do you think Mothman is real?
Mothman?
Mothman, yeah.
I don't know what Mothman is. I thought,
You don't know what Mothman is?
no, I would have assumed that was
That's
like a
ultimate cryptid
cartoon
right there.
character or something,
Oh my
comic
God.
book.
You gotta look it up. I think it was from Michigan.
Hmm.
And these two, then there are multiple accounts of a man-shaped moth.
If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm not going to make you take a final exam. I want you to turn in all your work, so if there are people who owe me assignments, you all have enough absences to where if I counted next Monday as an absence, you would still pass. And you are all in a range where you either have an A now, or I can tell that if there are a couple people who owe me an assignment or two, that it will maintain your A. And so there's no reason for me to take a group of students. And by the way, you've been a really fun group. I've had a good time in here. Good personalities, good discussion, and this has just been, there's a heartbeat, I felt like, in this group, that just wasn't there in a lot of other sections, so I deeply appreciate that.
Nice.
Yeah, there's no sense in making you take a final exam. You've just finished 4.5 months of work and lectures and listening to me and doing journals and taking exams. You've already scored the A. Well, I need you to validate it for me? Like, why? Because you tricked me and you didn't really deserve an A, and now I have to validate it? It just makes no sense for me to force you with an A to take a final exam. You have an A, you earned an A, that end of story.